Schizophrenia. It's one of the most severe and, frankly, devastating illnesses known to medicine. It often strikes early in life, it can limit a person's potential, and it changes lives forever. But what exactly is it? And why, after so many decades of research, is it still such a profound mystery? Well, that's what we're going to dive into right now. Just listen to this quote. It's from a family member, and it just captures the immense human cost of this illness. This isn't just about symptoms you read about in a textbook. It's about this fundamental, heartbreaking change, this loss of self that families feel so deeply. And it's that feeling, that sense of loss, that really drives the urgency to understand what's going on. And that really is the big question here, isn't it? For decades, we've been hunting for answers. And yeah, we've definitely made progress, but the core of the illness, it's remained stubbornly out of reach. So let's investigate why. Okay, so first things first. To really get why this mystery has been so hard to crack, we kind of have to compare schizophrenia to other major diseases where we've had a lot more success. This slide really frames the whole problem perfectly. With so many other diseases, scientists eventually found a smoking gun. For HIV, it was the virus itself. For Huntington's, a specific single gene. For polio, we developed a vaccine that targets the cause head-on. But schizophrenia, it has none of that. There's no single virus to fight, no one gene to fix, and no magic bullet cure. This lack of a clear single target is exactly what makes it a fundamentally different and way more complex challenge. So, if there isn't one simple cause, where do you even start looking for clues? Well, the most logical place has always been our genetic blueprint. The hope was that our DNA would hold a straightforward answer. For the longest time, the dream in research was to find the schizophrenia gene. Something like the BRCA gene for breast cancer, where finding it tells you there's a huge increase in risk. It would have been so much simpler. But after decades of searching, we now know that idea, as nice as it sounds, just isn't right. The genetic story is a whole lot messier. And this slide really lays out just how tangled that story is. Instead of one faulty gene, it's a mix of things. First, you've got what's called polygenic risk. This means hundreds, maybe even thousands of super common genetic variations, each add a tiny, tiny drop to the bucket of risk. Then you have rare but much more powerful mutations, these things called CNVs, that can have a bigger impact. And then on top of all of that, you have epigenetics, which is a fancy way of saying that your environment can actually change how your genes are expressed. So the bottom line is, it's not about having one bad gene. It's more like a really complicated genetic and environmental lottery. All right, so from the genetic blueprint, let's turn to the living, working brain. If the problem isn't one single gene, maybe it's just one chemical that's out of whack. That was the next logical step in the investigation. Pretty much anyone who's heard anything about schizophrenia has probably heard the word dopamine. And the dopamine hypothesis, the idea that psychosis is tied to too much dopamine activity, is still a really important piece of the puzzle. It was a huge first step, but we now know it was just the opening chapter, not the whole book. And that's because the brain's communication system is just unbelievably intricate. This image gives you a little sense of that. Modern antipsychotic medications, they don't just block one little dopamine receptor. They're more like a master key that fits into a whole bunch of different locks at the same time. Scientists call this intramolecular polypharmacy. It sounds complex, but all it really means is that one single molecule is doing the work of many different drugs at once. And that's because the communication breakdown in schizophrenia isn't just about dopamine. It's like the whole symphony of chemical messengers in the brain is playing out of tune. We're talking about key players like serotonin, which regulates mood, glutamate, which is the brain's main go signal, and GABA, its main stop signal. They're all involved. It's a system-wide problem. Okay, so if the problem is system-wide, what can we actually see when we look inside the brain itself? Let's check out the physical evidence from brain scans. So when we use powerful tools like PET scans and fMRI to look at the brains of patients, we don't find one big, obvious spot of damage. There's no single crime scene. What we see instead are these subtle but consistent patterns of change spread across many interconnected parts of the brain. The parts involved in planning, memory, and how we perceive the world. This just confirms the network idea. The problem isn't in one location, it's in the connections between locations.
Now, to find even more subtle clues, researchers are looking for something called endophenotypes. It's a bit of a technical term, but think of them as biological fingerprints. They aren't symptoms of the illness itself, like hearing voices, but they are these measurable traits that are linked to it. And they're so valuable because they help us bridge that huge gap between the super complex genetics and the super complex symptoms.
A classic example of this? Eye tracking. It sounds a little weird, I know, but many people with schizophrenia, and even some of their close relatives, have a hard time smoothly tracking a moving object with their eyes. It's not something you'd notice day to day, but in a lab, it's a clear, measurable deficit. And here's the kicker. The brain circuits that control those smooth eye movements are spread out all over the brain, involving many of the same areas that light up weirdly on brain scans. It's yet another piece of evidence pointing away from a single broken part and toward a distributed network problem.
Okay, so let's recap. Our investigation has taken us from genetics to brain chemistry to brain structure, and every single clue is pointing in the same direction. Schizophrenia is a network disorder. So, what in the world does that mean for how we treat it? This new understanding, it forces a huge shift in how we have to think about treatment. The old idea was all about finding that magic bullet, one pill to fix one chemical problem and just squash the symptoms. The new reality is about systems management. The goal isn't just to make the symptoms go away. It's about providing continuous, ongoing support to a complex system, with the real focus on improving a person's ability to function and live their life.
So what does this new strategy actually look like? Well, it boils down to a few key things. First, improving adherence. Because the system needs constant support, using things like long-acting injections or patches to provide steady medication is a game changer. Second, you have to target cognition directly. Medication is great, but it might not be enough to rewire the brain, so you combine it with special therapies to help strengthen those affected networks. And third, and this is really exciting, is to intervene early. By identifying young people who are at high risk, in what's called the prodromal phase, we have a chance to step in and offer support before the network gets more severely disrupted.
So, the crucial point we've arrived at, the big conclusion of this whole investigation, is this. After looking at all the evidence, the best way to describe schizophrenia isn't as a disease of a single gene or a single chemical or a single spot in the brain. It is a disorder of the brain's entire distributed communication network.
And that leaves us with a final, really powerful question. If schizophrenia isn't just one broken part, maybe we can stop searching for a magic wrench to fix it. And instead, maybe we can focus on learning how to help a complex system heal itself. I mean, that changes everything. It suggests the future isn't just about finding a single fix. It's about learning how to provide the right conditions with medication, therapy, and support to help this complex dynamic system stabilize and maybe even begin to repair itself. And that right there is a much more hopeful vision for the future.